Hey everybody, Dominic Cotroneo here after yesterday's chaotic win over the Cubs, everything with counsel and all of that stuff. This is not about that. This is 3 plays that I found very interesting, or 3 notes, 3 nuggets that I had in my notebook that I want to break down with you here today in just a real quick, brief intro, or just a brief of how my brain works sometimes during the games. And let's just go ahead and jump into it. The first play that I really noticed, and I think is something that we're going to bookmark here down the road, is Jackson Chourio's defense in yesterday's game. This may seem inauspicious, or you may say, Dom, he's supposed to make this play. But this really stuck out to me. The pop-up by Seiya Suzuki earlier in the 4th inning. Let's take a watch again.
Auxiliary buttons to do things like that, and I'm sure that was prearranged. Fly ball to right, got a long run, and Chourio runs it down. Nice play. He had a long way to go. Was in the
So let's
gap
break
in
that
the right.
down, okay? That may not seem like, okay, Dom, he's supposed to make that play. The summary shows us his route. Look at that perfect straight line to the ball. And this orange line is where the ball ended up. This is a very good route. When we look at the actual StatCast data, his catch probability on this play was 35%, meaning it's a 4-star catch, meaning majority of the time, most outfielders are not going to be able to get to this baseball. That is calculated based on how far back you're starting, your jump, and your sprint speed. All other factors that go into this as well. But when we break it down into the minutia here, he needed just about 100 feet. And if that sounds similar, it's just like the pop-up against Miami. I'll flash it up on the screen here, that he had a long way to race to and get to that ball. When you compare these 2 plays, they're fairly similar, but also very different. The big difference is the opportunity time. Jackson had a little bit more time to make this play, but not a lot more time. And the few things that really jump out to me are the jump and things like that. But when I go into his whole season stat search here, the first number that pops out to me about this play in particular, his route efficiency. Exactly what we talked about. A perfectly straight line on that summary, right? 99% route efficiency. That draws a line from where you are starting to where you need to finish. He was almost 100% dead straight line of where he needed to be. That's a massive improvement for him, because when you look at the rest of these plays, 90s, Dom, he's in the 90s all the time. But when you look at the catch percentages over here, there aren't very unlikely catches over here, meaning he's got efficient routes on balls that he is supposed to catch. I can go ahead and filter this based on catch probability, and I want everything less than 60% catch probability to take a peek at what his route efficiency has been. So as we said, that was his best one of the season. When we go back to the data here and we see some other good routes, they had higher catch probabilities. And there is that Miami one again, a 0% catch probability with not the greatest route efficiency. I'm not saying he should have caught the ball. I'm saying the data is telling us that maybe Jackson would have had a better chance at it if he took a more efficient route, less rounded on his way to the baseball, and obviously he pulled up at the very end. We all know how that happened. When we think about what Jackson Chourio needs to do better, is make better routes and better reads. And then when we take off this filter of the catch probability, we see the great route efficiency. Look at his jumps as of late. That was the jump in Miami was his best jump. This is measuring how much ground you cover in the first 3 seconds of the ball being in the air. Covering 46 feet on that short opportunity was great. You see the Alika Williams one, this was a single, it was way out of his reach. But then here, 44 feet in the first 3 seconds is why he was able to get to that Suzuki ball. These are things that I'm going to be monitoring the rest of the year to see if Jackson Chourio's defense continues to improve like we've seen as of late. Next up, the second thing on my list is talking about Robert Gasser and the variety that he used in yesterday's game. I've gone back to Baseball Savant here. This one's public-facing. The first one was not. This one is Gasser's Illustrator here just from the game page yesterday. You go to Illustrator, you can look at the pitch chart. We're simply changing it to strikeouts. And we look at Robert Gasser's strikeouts. We see 3 on that signature sweeping slider. We see 2 on the 4-seam fastball. This one underneath here, this changeup, that's actually a cutter to Ian Happ. And then here's a changeup to Miguel Amaya. When you look at these and you're like, okay, low in the zone, but for me, what jumps out is the variety that he used here. And I can break this down even further. When we go and remove strikeouts now, and what I want to do is I want to look at count breakdowns. This will take us into little pie charts of everybody that pitched into the game, and we specifically will go here to Robert Gasser. Right off the bat, we can see that A, He throws everything on first pitch. There is no signature pattern. Remember, there were 8 right-handed hitters in the lineup yesterday, so keep that in mind. He's probably going to face a lot of righties throughout his career. A lot of changeups, or not a lot, I should say, 6 changeups, so 29% of the time he threw a first pitch changeup. Then he threw, same thing, first pitch sweeper. He threw more sweepers and changeups first pitch than he threw straight fastballs at 3 straight fastballs. He threw 3 sinkers, and he also threw 3 cutters. So 9 of those, and then 12 of these. Pretty darn good. And then he only failed to throw a first pitch strike 3 times out of 21 batters faced yesterday. The fact that he's doing it with all different kinds of pitches, there are some first pitch swings in there too, is certainly useful. When we look at the rest of the chart here, though, notice a 0 in the 2-0 and a 0 in 3-0. He did not get into a 2-0 or a 3-0 count at all. In fact, in his first 4 starts as a big leaguer, Robert Gasser has not fallen into a 3-0 count. Go ahead and give me the broadcaster jinx if you want, but one of his main reasons that he is so successful, even without swing and miss in the first 3 starts, which he got it in this start against the Cubs, is the fact that he is a strike thrower. He's only given up 1 extra base hit all season. He's not afraid to get inside to righties. He's not afraid to go soft down. He can really mix things well. And by mixing, we look at what he's doing when he's ahead in the count, still mixing. When he's got a 1-2 count, he's using everything. Now, 0-2 obviously dominated by the sweeping slider. And when you look a little closer as well, 3-2 is considered an even count. But 1 pitch here went behind in the count. Over here, you've got 4 pitches went behind in the count. So that's 5 right there. And then over here, 2 and 1. So that's 8 more. 8 total pitches he was behind in the count. 8. The entire game. 3 with a 1-0 count, 4 with a 2-1 count, and 1 with a 3-1 count. That is why he was so successful. And even yet, with 1-1, another action pitch, kind of restarting the count, just like we talked about with 0-0. He's throwing just about everything. In fact, majority, he is throwing the sweeper 3 times. Not many 1-1 counts, so small samples, but the fact that Gasser can throw anything at any time is certainly going to be important. All 5 pitches on 0-0, all 5 pitches on 1-1, and all 5 pitches in some variety when he has 2 strikes. I thought that was massive. And finally, the other thing that I had noticed when I was looking at the pitch logs from this game, the cutter strikeout that he had to Ian Happ, that was actually the first cutter he had thrown in the whole game. That was the first cutter he had thrown all game, kept them on his toes the rest of the game. Next up to talk about from this game is something and somebody I've talked about in just about every one of these that I've done. It's Bryan Hudson. What more can you say about Bryan Hudson? These are up-to-the-minute numbers against right-handed hitters this season. He's throwing still majority fastballs, but the sweeper is what's jumping out. Opponents are still 0 for 24. Right-handed opponents are still 0 for 24 against the sweeper with 15 strikeouts on that pitch. And even when they're putting it in play, it's a ground ball. An average launch angle of negative 14 degrees. The whiff rate, they're swinging and missing 4 out of 10 times that they swing at the pitch. So think of it this way. If you get 10 swings on that sweeping breaking ball from Bryan Hudson, 4 of them are going to be swings and misses. The rest of them are likely going to be ground balls. That is how elite the pitch has been. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper as to why this is working so well for him. As a lefty, you noticed it, he came in with first and second and nobody out to face all righties. You're thinking, well, what's the deal? This is part of the reason why. And I was diving into some of the release points and the vertical releases and the horizontal releases and that sort of thing. And I found something very interesting here that, stay with me here, gets a little complicated. When we look at vertical release, that is on, your good old classic chart where anything in the top right would be coming from the batter's perspective here. So when we're looking at anything vertical, if it's lower the number, that means you're more and more toward a submarine or sidearm style. Tyler Rogers, of course, the guy who barely throws it above the ground. He's the last submarine pitcher that we have in today's game. When we look at other low vertical releases, no surprise to see Hobie Milner. If you've never seen a chart like this or this data before, just remember that the data is all from the batter's perspective. So we can go back over here to the illustrator and we can actually look at the release point. And we update it here to look at Bryan Hudson. So again, this is from the catcher's point of view, the batter's perspective. Imagine The y-axis is right here, this solid line, and then, of course, the ground would be this axis right here. So Hudson is throwing over here from the batter's right. If I'm a right-handed hitter, I'm seeing it well in theory, but it's coming from this sort of lower than usual slot. So what gives here? The vertical release for Bryan Hudson is under 5 feet on average. What does that even mean? Well, for a guy who's 6'8", one of the tallest pitchers in baseball, for a guy that gets some of the best extension in baseball, 7.3 feet, this starts to paint the picture even more, like we've talked about, of how deceptive he really is. Let's just go ahead and take a look at a couple of balls into play here. Let's look at one of his sweepers here that was called a strike to Miguel Amaya. A right-handed batter seeing a sweeper. Now, when we break it down frame by frame, first and foremost, he is right in the middle of the rubber, okay? Gasser works from the extreme third base side of the rubber. But as the 6'8" frame rocks, you'll notice the extension that we're talking about, 7 feet of extension, so longer than his actual height. And the ball is really hidden well behind his head, whips it around, and he really is less than 3/4 here as he delivers the baseball. So the fastball, not only is it getting on you because he's literally giving the ball to you closer to you, but it looks like it's coming from a little bit of a lower slot, and it might be even rising a little bit from a right-hander's perspective. This pitch, though, was the sweeper. And when you think about it from a righty, this pitch looks like it's coming from the other batter's box. Like, okay, no, that's a ball. I don't need to swing at that. And oh my goodness, look at all that movement, and it's right down the middle. Brilliant pitching from Bryan Hudson again yesterday. He got 3 more strikeouts. Even though he doesn't get saves, he has got to be one of the best relievers in baseball. He's only Emmanuel Clase has a better ERA than him at this point in the season. And part of the reason is the deception and his effectiveness against righties. Even though you would think, oh, the platoon says you got to bring in a righty to face this lefty, he has found a way to keep them off balance with that sweeping fastball coming from such an interesting slot, the sweeping slider, I should say. Coming low, the fastball pairs well with it, a couple of cutters in there too. Really impressive stuff from Bryan Hudson once again. So those are a few things that caught my eye. And just to put a little cherry on top here, when you look at all the lefties that threw yesterday for the Brewers, so here, this main cluster is Robert Gasser. He actually throws it because, remember, we talked about it, he's from the third base side of the rubber, a little bit more on the plate, which allows him to get into righties. Here's the cluster of Bryan Hudson. And then down here, there's the cluster of Hobie Milner. Of course, he throws traditionally sidearm, much lower than Hudson, and yet it's still popping up here. So creating deception, different arm angles are what helps bullpens create their own identities. I hope this all makes sense. I appreciate you guys, everybody who's been listening, who's been tweeting, who's been watching. These are really fun to make for me. So thank you again for watching. Like, subscribe, tell me what you want to know. And these are 3 plays that I saw from Game 1 of the Cubs and the Brewers. Back with more a little bit later. Keep on swinging.